Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 12th District. We're back. That's right. After a few weeks off, we had some staff adjustments we had to make, and we are pleased to have Uriah Darby at our production in our production room now, running the 12th District for us over the next several weeks. We've got lots to cover. We got lots to review. We're going to do that today. A lot has happened since we took a few weeks off. An election went by. Interest rates have gone up substantially. Housing markets changed, real estate. And of course, this incredibly weird weather we're having, I guess it's strange, considering all the talk of global climate change and global warming. This is one of the coldest Decembers I've ever seen in all the years I've been here. It is about 8 degrees outside right now at the time of our taping, and this is the shortest day of the year, so hopefully we're climbing back out of it. We're hearing about 0-degree temperatures in December. Pretty unusual. Back to politics, we'll be covering a lot going forward. We do business and politics here, and that's what we'll try to cover going forward. But Mike Steele, Representative Keith Gaynor will be joining us on every week, starting in the second week in January. We'll have a preview with them of Olympia. That is coming up next week or the week after, depending on when we can track them down. We'll get a preview of what's happening in Olympia, and then we'll have a weekly report. It's the only show like it, as far as I know, in the state of Washington, where you have your actual state representatives giving a weekly report here on the NCW Life channel. So that'll be great. We're looking forward to seeing them in Olympia. It's going to be a very challenging year. As you know, the House is now at 40 seats. They lost 1 seat after hoping to pick up 4 or 5. We'll talk about a little bit about that in the second segment today. The Senate is down 1 seat, so the Republicans have a huge challenge ahead of them. Jay Inslee's already introduced a $70 billion budget. No tax cuts, no breaks for anyone. This is full spending. As a matter of fact, it's more spending than ever in history. It's a 10% increase over the last budget. This is just amazing numbers, and we're going to be following that and where he's spending that money. We'll tell you about that in a show coming up soon. New taxes kicking in, too. You might want to realize that on January 1st, we have the new carbon tax coming online, carbon trading scheme that will eventually raise fuel prices anywhere from 20 to 40 cents a gallon over the next year. We have a capital gains tax. Now, that is still in the courts, but the courts have said go ahead and make it happen. So the state is setting up a capital gains tax system, and until the courts say otherwise, that is actually in force as of January 1. Coming back on July 1st, we will see the long-term care tax as well, probably at higher premiums than we saw last time. So there's a lot going on. There's increases in a number of fees and things as well. Add to that the $70 billion budget, and it's going to be very interesting. Last but not least, minimum wage goes to $15.74. That's certainly going to affect our small businesses. Due to the inflation, it pushed that up to astronomical numbers, and you take and combine that with higher payroll taxes, which are coming as well. It's going to get significantly tougher for small business. So there you have it. We'll come back and talk about what happened in business and economy in the first segment. Then we're going to come back and talk about the circular firing squad, the real reason the Republicans didn't do as well this time around. Well, welcome back. Out of all the stories this year, I think the most interesting one might be why the red wave never happened for the Republicans. There's certainly a lot of ideas and a lot of controversy around this, because all indicators were that the Republicans would do much better, both nationally and at the state level, than they did. I'm going to break this down for you. Let's start with what were the concerns going into the election. This poll was done, several of them were done in October, and here are the top 10 items that people were concerned about. The national economy was, of course, at the top of the list. Guns were second. Now, you could take that one either way, either pro-gun or anti-gun. It was a concern. Crime was number 3. Healthcare was in the top 4. Election integrity was certainly a concern again. Abortion, number 6. A little surprising since everybody seemed to think that was the big deal. Energy policy, immigration, and foreign policy followed. Now, what's curiously missing from that is climate change, not even in the top 10, not even in the top 15 in most surveys. Race relations, which the Democrats tend to be very focused on, not even a factor. and the coronavirus, which evaporated about as fast as the coronavirus did. It just seemed to be gone. So what was the factor that created the shift from the primaries, which looked very good for the Republicans? Well, I'm going to tell you it was self-inflicted for the most part. Certainly abortion in this state had a lot to do with it, but the circular firing squad among the various factors of the Republican Party contributed to most of the failures. I will give you some examples from right here in our own state. We had 3 congressional races that were contested. The 3rd district down in the southwest area of Washington state had 3 Republicans all contesting for the same position against 1 Democrat. After the primary, Joe Kent, arguably a strong MAGA Trump supporter and conservative, had taken out Herrera and was simply running against the Democrat. Now, Joe Kent was much further to the right than Jamie Herrera, who was considered somewhat of a moderate, but Jamie had held that seat for many, many years and was fairly well liked. Of course, she voted against Trump like Dan Newhouse did. Therefore, Joe Kent won the primary. In the end, Joe Kent lost to the Democrat. Now, there's a number of reasons. Probably he might have been a little too conservative for that district, which tends to be a little more purple than red. But on the other hand, all the crossfire between the 3 of them probably didn't help any of them, and we'll see that continues as we look to other races. In the 4th district, we had a number of people trying to take out Dan Newhouse, who basically was one of the 10 that voted again against Trump, and therefore a lot of folks thought he should go, even though his track record outside of that was really quite good. The one who really challenged him was Lauren Culp, coming fresh off his loss as governor, for running for governor, decided he could take this on in the 4th district, and he was the primary contender, but then others jumped in. Brad Clippert came in from Tri-Cities, Jared Sessler, a newcomer from Tri-Cities, also in, and a number of others, and they really got into the circular firing squad again. Probably the second worst group in the state that took on each other, and in the end, Newhouse prevailed. And not only did he prevail, he had the highest vote count and the best percentage of any Republican in the state of Washington in the end. Dan Newhouse was your top performing Republican in Washington state this year after surviving the circular firing squad. Excuse me. Now, we're not quite so lucky in the 8th district. This is the ultimate story of circular firing squads. Early on, 3 candidates, Matt Larkin, Jesse Jensen, and Reagan Dunn, were vying for the position to run against Dr. Schreier. Well, the fact is the polls showed clearly that Reagan Dunn had a leg up because a good portion of this district happens to be in King County, and it happens to be a little less conservative. And Reagan Dunn kind of filled that because he's been very successful in King County. He's also was the only pro-choice candidate, which he took some heat on over here, but frankly fit the district better. And in all the polls, it showed he had the best shot of beating Kim Schreier. Well, Jesse Jensen, after being on his second run, didn't take too kindly to that and opened fire on Reagan Dunn, him and his campaign, with a number of negative commercials. And of course, Reagan Dunn, forced to fight back, fired back. And those two assaulted each other to the point where Matt Larkin, who was relatively quiet through this whole procedure, walked right into the position to run against Kim Schreier. He was obviously the odd man out of the battle. Matt Larkin, an excellent candidate, but the most conservative of the 3 by far, again, didn't fit the district very well. And in the end, Kim Schreier won. Would Reagan Dunn have won if he'd continued? Well, that's hard to say, but all polls show that he would have done considerably better as a pro-choice candidate. Remember where Kim Schreier aimed her attack was tying basically Larkin to Trump, to being ultra-conservative and being pro-life. That was the big push. And again, she won by a better margin than she did against Jesse Jensen just a few years ago. Now, the biggest, most expensive race in the state was Tiffany Smiley. No circular firing squad here, none at all. She ran from beginning to end as the only candidate against Patty Murray, and she did a very good job on the campaign trail. However, early on, Tiffany Smiley was moving quite quite conservative. She came out of the chute really conservative, pro-life, pro-Trump. And then as things developed, she tried to moderate it. Unfortunately, those things came back to haunt her as Patty Murray tied her directly to Trump and to a strong pro-life position. That is not going to fly in Washington State. It did not. And unfortunately, Tiffany lost by quite a bit more than anyone expected. Also, a circular firing squad showed up in the Secretary of State's race, where we had too many Republicans, again, running against each other, attacking each other, and the party made no particular candidate the lead candidate. They just really didn't say who the lead candidate was. There was a couple that were very effective. And in the end, we've got a Democrat and an independent after the primary. We did not even put a Republican in the race. Once again, not well thought out, not well done. These practices are going to have to change if the Republicans are going to be effective in this state. In the end, the interesting part of the Secretary of State's race was the independent was leading until an effort was made. Brad Clippert, who ran for 4th District, we mentioned earlier, decided to run for Secretary of State as a write-in candidate, and that write-in candidate getting about 5% of the vote was just enough to push Anderson out and keep Democrat Steve Hobbs, back in the seat. Now, Steve Hobbs was not expected to win this race. The independent was clearly expected to win, and thanks to that write-in effort, we have a Democrat. So, bottom line on all this is the Republicans have got to get more focused, like the Democrats, on who is their candidate and stay with it. And pick candidates that fit the districts, that fit the state, not candidates that would do great in Idaho that can't win here. That's happened far too often. On the State House side, not such good news there either. We expected a 4 to 5 seat pickup at least. We ended up going 1 seat down. Abortion was the key issue in the exit polls on all of that, mostly in Western Washington. That was the major issue, and it did take out several close races. Now, those races were extremely close. In District 42 up in Bellingham, District 10, they were extremely close. But in the end, we lost a seat. Same thing on the Senate side. We lost 2 Senates, but we gained 1 in District 35, so the net's 1 loss. So the current count now is 58 to 40, which gives the Democrats almost a supermajority. That is problematic. And the state Senate is 28-21, which is a pretty big gap. The last thing on the ballot we did not see this year was an initiative. There were no initiatives for the 3rd year in a row. This is highly unusual, but it's been more difficult to qualify them. There are 11 initiatives out for signature right now for next year's poll. We'll see if any of them make it. We'll be letting you know after the first of the year on that one. The other thing that happened here, and that happened across the nation, but mostly here, is voter turnout was not as good as it was 4 years ago in the last midterm race. We ended up statewide at about 64%. That's about 10 points less than the last time. And a lot of the counties in eastern Washington had very low voter turnout. So once again, the Republicans didn't show up to the polls on some of those close races. I'll give you a couple examples. Colum County, Island County, Jefferson County, San Juan, and Whatcom were all in the 70% bracket. Those are all primary Democrat counties. But Whatcom County was where Simon Zefcik was running for Senate. They needed that seat, and again, the turnout there was extremely high for Democrats and not for Republicans. The Democrats outvoted us there, and in Island County as well, where it was darn near a recount for the House race. That's how close it was. But once again, turnout ruled the day in those races. In the 3 big counties, King, Snohomish, and Pierce, the numbers were a little lower, surprisingly. King County vote came in at 65%, about what the state average was. Snohomish at 63%, Pierce at 60%. Chelan County was exceptional for eastern Washington, turning in about 68%. A little surprised that Douglas County was 63%. Last but not least, locally was a very interesting and very hotly contested races here. For sheriff, for clerk, for county commissioner, and for judge, they were all a lot of money and a lot of time spent on those campaigns. In the end, Sean Smith squeaked by independent Ann Hesberg with just about 400 plus votes. That was very close. Marty Young also made it by about 500 votes against Sandra Archiga for the position of secretary. And the judge's race turned out kind of interesting. John Volan originally beat Alan Blackman for a judge's position, but then because of a resignation, Alan Blackman was appointed a judge's position, so both of them fared fairly well. And in the last example of a circular firing squad, our sheriff's race. Republicans split on this sheriff's race between Mike Morrison and Burnett, allowing the Democrats to pick sides, which they did, and Mike Morrison prevailed in the end. And that is something that has happened at least once before, back a few years ago in a Senate race when Brad Hawkins was running against the more conservative John Weiss. The same situation happened there when Republicans split. They tend to lose. Now, in this case, Mike Morrison's a Republican, so it's not that Democrats did not get an independent or a Democrat, so I believe we're probably just fine, but that's how it happened. There you go. We'll be right back to wrap it up. Well, we're glad to be back here at the 12th District. A lot has happened in the weeks that we missed, and we're going to do just a rough a rundown from economics and business standpoint as to what happened. Most of you know inflation still continues, even though it's starting to drop a bit. It's still a major concern, and because of that, the Federal Reserve has continued to raise rates. There's been several rate increases since we've been on the air. The fact is interest rates now are continuing to increase at all levels, including mortgages, savings accounts, CDs. Everything is adjusting upward, and that is creating some real headaches for folks. If you have an adjustable rate mortgage, next year could be very challenging. If you're a government, this is something we talk about a lot on this show, the government cost of borrowing is going up substantially, at 2 and 3 and 4 times as much. Therefore, if you look at the federal budget, when the cost of borrowing goes up, the spending has to go down or the deficit has to go up. There's no easy way out. And the fact is right now, it looks like deficits will continue for some time, and we don't see any end to this. The Federal Reserve will probably raise rates again in the first part of the year unless they get inflation under control. This has put extreme pressure on the real estate market. Now, the good side of that is the inventory levels have maintained fairly low. Pricing is starting to moderate or come down in some areas, particularly in Seattle, starting to see some price reductions and things you haven't seen for many years. And so the real estate market is a close watch right now. The one thing that's kind of saving it is that a lot of folks are locked into low-interest mortgages, and they're not going to sell, and they're not going to take the price reduction. So there's not a flood of listings at this point. But that could change in the spring of next year if the interest rates keep climbing. We're looking at 30-year rates now at about, well, they were as high as 7%. They've backed back down because the demand is starting to taper so quickly that we're at about 6.25, and that, of course, could go up with the last rate increase and more to come. Stock market, who knows? That's one you just can't guess. It's up, it's down, it's all over the place. For the most part, it's off a bit. But people are hanging on. The earnings are still good. Companies are still setting good sales records. The numbers are actually pretty good. But again, as interest rates continue to rise, the pressure on the stock market will continue. Labor market is another one that's very interesting right now. We're still seeing a shortage of laborers. We have a lot of folks out there looking for employees, looking for people to work. And no one has a real answer as to why that has still hung over from the coronavirus situation, why it's still a problem. Unemployment is extremely low, so there's a lack of workers. But the fact is, it seems like a lot of people just don't want to work or just don't want certain kinds of jobs. And it's getting very difficult for some business folks to keep things stocked, including the government. The state of Washington has had trouble keeping their offices in gear, including Washington DOT. State situation, budget. Still, the income, Washington State still has a very good revenue stream. It is tapering. It is flattening. We've seen it go up and up and up. It has now kind of hit a flat line. But it appears that the governor doesn't seem to be phased. He has introduced a $70 billion budget, one of the largest budgets in state history. It is the largest budget in state history. Another 10% increase. Amazing number. No tax cuts, no relief for the folks on inflation with inflation issues. And he's moving forward with that budget. We'll be talking more about that, of course, in the future shows as we have Mike and Keith tell us what's going on in Olympia. Immigration on the national scene, no fix. It's getting worse, and Title 42 may evaporate any day, which means we'll probably have even more folks coming across the border. Texas has been taking some action on the border. Arizona, not so much. California, even Governor Newsom is saying something's got to be done. He's getting overwhelmed with people coming across the border. Of course, he's paying. He's paying health care and some food stamps and welfare-related things to those folks, and it's going to break the state, he says, if they can't slow that flow. So even liberal California is struggling. A couple of other just side notes. Homeless, yeah, still a problem. As a matter of fact, Washington State grew their homeless population faster than any state in the union. We've got to get a handle on that soon. Fentanyl, obviously still up. Fentanyl deaths and drug use is up and up and up. And crime, yes, continues to increase in virtually every major city. And now, latest reports are some of the minor, more smaller cities, our medium-sized cities, are seeing huge increases in crime as well. And then on top of everything else, we've got the war with Ukraine, which we're going to spend a whole show on. I still think there's a lot to be uncovered in that particular situation, but lots to talk about. So there you have it, kind of a thumbnail sketch of what happened while we were gone. We'll be covering the economy and business every week from here on out in our first segment. Second segment will be politics. We'll be right back to talk about the circular firing squad and why the Republicans failed to create the red wave that they'd hoped for. Well, there you have it. A little short wrap-up on what happened and what's ahead. We'll be getting our state representatives in here in the next week or so, and they'll be with us every week to tell us what's going on in Olympia. It's going to be a very interesting year. The Democrats are feeling very strong and could push even more progressive ideas that could make things even worse when it comes to crime, drugs, and other things. We've got inflation to deal with, interest rates, crime, and everything else, including immigration. We'll be talking about all of it right here on the 12th District, where you get the facts from someone who's been in the game for 20 years. It's good to be back. Thank you for being with us. We will see you next week, and in the following weeks again, Representative Steele and Representative Gaynor will be here to tell you what's going on in Olympia. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week on the 12th District.